Hello, everyone, and welcome to this podcast from the Light Review. And we're looking at the subject of greenwashing. It's something that we talk about a lot. I suspect that an awful lot of us don't really know what's behind it. We suspect that greenwashing is something that comes out of a marketing department and probably doesn't really matter most of the time. But actually what we want to talk about today is that greenwashing is fundamentally perilous. It is a danger to us all. There is a reason why we want to do eco-friendly lighting. And there are things that we have gone through in the past and we thought they were a good idea and they turned out not to be a good idea, and that's changed the argument. We're in a different place. And I'm happy to welcome Elena Limberidi-Settimo from the European Environmental Bureau, and Elena's going to be talking to us about the specific issue of mercury, which for those of us who think that's not an issue at all, I think Elena's going to bring some interesting facts to the table on that one. And also to welcome Michael Sholand, who is a senior advisor on CLASP, which we all know is the, I'm going to read this, the Collaborative Labeling and Appliance Standards Program. So what Mike's interested in is the quality of products that are coming to market, and therefore he has some interesting views on the status of product and their greenwash rating, if you like. Eleanor, okay. Just before we start, just explain about EEB.
Thank you, John. So the European Environmental Bureau is the largest network of EU environmental citizens organizations in Europe. It has over 170 groups and networks from more than 36 countries, and it's representing around 30 million individual members and supporters. So the EB has been following mainly EU environmental policy for over 40 years. And on mercury, we've been following the work since 2004. And more specifically, and actually even before that, with the restriction of hazardous substances directive, the famous RoHS directive. So this directive is actually banning the use of certain chemicals from electric and electronic equipment, including mercury. But there is an annex which actually exempts this banning. So it still allows the use of mercury in the fluorescent lighting for the purpose of this discussion. So this has been one of the main instruments which has been regulating mercury in lights.
Okay. Could we start off with a little bit of history as to, you know, as I said, mercury, what? I didn't even know we were still using it. So give us a sort of lowdown on where we actually are with mercury today and why we are still talking about it.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you for this. So let's remind ourselves that mercury and its compounds are toxic to human health and the environment, and especially to the developing nervous system. And mercury is used in many products, including in lamps, which will be the subject of today. There are many measures that have been taken at the European and also at the global level, as we will be discussing probably in the course of this podcast. But I have to remind that still in Europe, roughly 1/3 of all births, so 1.8 million babies, are born with methyl mercury levels above the safe limit. And methyl mercury is the most toxic form of mercury. Therefore, the objective has been at the European level and also at the global level to reduce and, where feasible, eliminate its use from products and processes. And that's why we are here today. Mercury is still used in lamps. However, a new technology is there, has been there for quite a while, and it's not using mercury. It's even more efficient, and therefore that would be the way forward. I don't know if you want me to go even more details now about the lamps itself.
Well, I think there's an odd thing here, isn't there? Because, you know, all my entire career, the lighting industry has patted itself on the back for how good it's been on energy efficiency, all of which has had mercury at its heart. Europe was the first probably part of the world that really started to invest heavily in LEDs. And so I think it's probably a decade or more since I last specified anything that was not an LED product. So our history with mercury, we thought was a positive one. And now I don't know anybody who specifies it, but it's still a problem. Mm-hmm. So where is it a problem? And if we know that it is such a problem, why haven't we acted more quickly to get rid of it?
So let me recap a little bit. It's true, as you said, back at the beginning of 2007, I mean, we were still using mercury in fluorescent lamps, but still the fluorescent lamps were much more efficient than the incandescent lamps. So at the time, we had what we called, even in our mercury wall, the mercury paradox, whereas by using a little bit of mercury in fluorescent lamps, even though since it was using less energy, then there would be less mercury coming out of coal-fired power plants, which was which was contributing in the energy production. And like this, would still this was beneficial from mercury side and from energy side and savings overall. And that's why at this time, indeed, everybody was happy to use and promoted the fluorescent technology. From our side, we tried, and this is what happened in 2008, and Europe led the way in that we reduced the mercury used in the fluorescent lights. So we still had the energy and the benefits, but we were using even less mercury. Just make a parenthesis here that, of course, by using mercury in the lamps, then mercury enters into the environment eventually. When the lamps break, the mercury will evaporate or will end up in the water, in our waste, and eventually in the fish weed, and then it goes back into the system. And also from, as I said, from energy side, because mercury is by nature in carbon. When you have when you're in coal, sorry, when you're burning coal, you will have the mercury emissions coming out in the air, eventually going into the water, being absorbed by the fish. And there you have the cycle of mercury.
Okay.
So at the EU level, we after reducing the mercury in the lamps, the Commission, I mean the regulation, the restriction of hazardous substances directive says that that these allowing mercury in the lamps, it was valid for around 5 years. So these exemptions should have been revised in 2016. And however, although the consultant of the Commission came out and already at that time evaluated that the LEDs had advanced quite well in the market and we could go for this jump and phase out the fluorescent lighting already by 2018, no decision was taken. And therefore, this is where we are now, actually, from this point from this part of the work, where a decision has still not been made. Now the proposals have come out, which are apparently going to the right direction, so towards phasing fluorescent lighting in the most used categories, the long fluorescent lights and the compact fluorescent lights that we use in our homes and in our offices. But this comes 6 years late, with, of course, the consequences of mercury that has been used all these last years, mercury that has been emitted in Europe and globally all these last years, and energy that has been wasted by using this technology, which have been, of course, much better if we had made this step and moved into LEDs back in 2018.
Okay. And would we be right in thinking that it's probably the developing areas of the world that are going to be suffering the longest?
I mean, at the time, already, beginning of 2000, of course, at the global level, the fluorescent lights were promoted and there was distribution of free fluorescent lights all over the planet in the developing countries. And now all of a sudden, we need, of course, to come back and say, no, this is not, it's not good now, and we need to go with the LEDs. So, of course, as there is always a difference, unfortunately, between the Western world and Europe and developing countries, it could be that the developing countries will be sort of harmed the most, and this is what we need to avoid. So not only that we take care of what is happening in Europe, but we need to be sure that this sort of remaining old technology does not continue being exported to the developing countries.
Okay.
Because there, again, from like waste and mercury treatment side, there are no controls or very little, and it's most likely that the mercury will end up in the environment in its totality.
Yeah, so that could, because they obviously they do not have something like a WE directive.
Exactly.
Throughout Africa to deal with this sort of thing. I'm also conscious that when we're talking about greenwash, there's the shadow side to this, because I don't see any lighting manufacturers talking about their fluorescent sources, their lamps or their light fittings. So this is almost like we have to find something and we don't know if it's there or not because they're not telling us. So those of us who are concerned with eco-design, and those of us who are concerned about the environmental nature, we need to start asking a few more questions of our manufacturers to find out just what it is that they're up to globally. If they're
this brings us to the discussion sort of in the last year or so, where basically, if one goes on the internet, can find all known industries producing lights where they say the real pros will go for LEDs or they don't use fluorescent lights. So the LED is being promoted indeed widely. However, where we are sitting in consultations with the European Commission and at global level with the Minamata Convention Secretariat, unfortunately, industry has been playing a different game. So there, they would try to delay any decisions that would lead to an immediate phase out of fluorescent lights. And this, of course, as it can be shown easily by their annual reports, which are publicly available, is that they have been making a lot of profit from these fluorescent lights. They have sort of oligopoly of the market. There are 2 or 3 of them, and they are making really big gains, big profits, and of course they want to continue using those as much as possible, even though they would sort of promote the LED at the same time. And of course this is something that people will not see. It will not be seen in a shop. Nobody can know this easily. So we would like to really bring this to the attention, because these discussions have actually caused this delay since 2016, because industry would come back and say that the socioeconomic costs for phasing out are enormous. They've been claiming that the lights cannot be replaced easily, the fluorescent lights cannot be replaced easily with LEDs, and therefore associating very big costs, which were actually not correct. And when in the last year, since end of 2019, especially with the studies from CLASP and the Swedish Energy Agency, this data came out and they were confirmed by the consultants from the European Commission. Then all of these studies were revised, and at the end, the result was actually that if we phase out, if we had phased out actually in 2021, which we are already missing this date, we would have almost 30 billion euro in net benefits and not costs anymore. So it's obvious that behind the back, under the table, as I would say, or behind the door, the discussion will be different from what we see on the internet or in publicities in our television. Okay,
so here's maybe a tip for my fellow specifiers. Spend a little bit of time on the internet and Google to see where you can get a T8 fluorescent tube from, and just see who the manufacturers are. And that helps you to make your specifying decisions with more knowledge. Doesn't mean to say you're necessarily not going to specify those companies, but you get a broader picture because that's a part of the picture that they're possibly not telling you. So there's a simple thing that we might be able to do just when we've got 5 minutes spare and a computer terminal to play with. Who's actually selling the fluorescent tubes? So let's start with that one, shall we? Michael, you're nodding there, and Eleanor gave Clasp a little name check there. Just explain to us what that. And I'm going to have to look at it. I'm going to have to read it again because I can't keep it in my head. The Collaborative Labeling and Appliance Standards Program. What are you up to with there?
Sure, you can edit this out, John, but it's no longer that name. I'm
not going to edit that. I'm going to leave that in because
okay.
That's what I thought. What is it now then?
It's just CLASP. You know, like there are companies around the planet that used to have these long names, international business machines, and now they are just IBM. So
I still call them international business.
I might be wrong about that then. But I was trying to think of an analogy, but there are, so CLASP rebranded itself or re-registered or somehow to simply be CLASP. So it is just CLASP.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to say CLASP. And if you need to know what CLASP does collaborative labeling and appliance standards.
Yes,
because as opposed to being something that you wear with a belt.
It's slightly broader now, and that's why,
right. Okay.
Abandoning the old acronym. But yeah, so CLASP is a international nonprofit, non-governmental organization. We're working in more than 50 countries around the world. Our focus is to support policymakers who are making decisions about products and equipment for regulation. And so my focus for the last 10 years, well, 10 plus years, has been in Brussels, supporting the European Commission's activities, primarily on the Eco-Design Directive, and now for the last 3 years on the ROS Directive as well. So I'm a specialist in lighting technology. And as Elena was saying, I co-published a study with the Swedish Energy Agency with Dr. Peter Bennick. He and I had been quite active in the Eco-Design Directive, along with other folks in setting the new regulations that came into effect, in fact, just a couple of days ago. On the 1st of September, the new EU Eco-Design regulations on lighting took effect. And he learned that there were some problems on the ROS directive side. Questions had come up within the Swedish government about fluorescent lighting and whether it was possible to phase out in favor of LED. And so we conducted a market study. We looked at compatibility tables that had been published by industry. We put together the first database that looked across different suppliers for compatibility with specific ballasts. And we demonstrated through that analysis that 91 to 93% of the existing fluorescent fixtures in Europe can accept LED retrofits from one of the major three suppliers in the market. So 91 to 93%. And the data that had been provided to the consultants previously was much, much less. And I remember, Elena, was it on the order of 20% or something like that? It was a much lower percentage of compatibility. And then it turns out that data was in fact 5 years out of date. It was like 2015 or 2014 data. And the reality is industry has been investing in drivers and has been investing to improve the compatibility of the electronics so that it is a direct drop-in replacement. You don't need to change the fixture. You can put in the LED tube. You can be mercury-free today. And then when it comes time to refurbish, you can put in a shiny new LED, internet-connected, fantastic fixture. But for the time being, you can cut your energy bill in half. You can have 2 to 3 times longer life. You just change the bulb to one of the LEDs. And our table is online. In fact, it was published as part of our analysis. So anyone who's specifying retrofit bulbs would be able to go there to look up the ballast that they have in the buildings they're designing for and find the options they have from the major suppliers.
So that actually is a response to my friends and colleagues who said we need these fluorescent tubes because we've still got loads and loads, thousands of fluorescent fixtures in place, and we do not have LED replacement. Actually, what you're saying, yes, we do have fluorescent replacement. We do have LED replacements.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I hope everybody's paying attention to that. In terms of the eco-design is an absolute what do we say? It's an open season on greenwashing to describe a fitting as being, you know, eco-designed. We see companies who 90-odd% of their range would never ever be described as eco-design, but they will promote the 5% that are. Are you seeing anything in any movement toward an improvement in that position? Are manufacturers being helped in any way to be able to move towards a more of an eco-design platform? Because obviously what we want to do is we want every light fitting to be made on circular economy terms, to be able to be reused when it's gone through the end of its first life, all of those things. But a lot of companies are saying we don't know how to do that, and I don't think we can afford to do that. But from the work that you're doing, are you seeing any improvement on that position?
Yeah, well, I'm just to clarify, the term eco-design is both a term of art and a specific legal term.
I'm using it as a term of art, Mike.
Yes, I understand. So just to draw a distinction with my use of the term, I was speaking about the Eco-Design Directive, which does set requirements, including, you know, efficiency. There are flicker requirements in there. There's lifetime. So there's a number of requirements to ensure that there's a basic level of quality, a level playing field. Everybody can expect decent lighting, good quality lighting across Europe, thanks to the Eco-Design Directive. Now, eco-design as a concept in companies, that there has been a movement towards what one might term disposable luminaires, glued together, where components are not repairable, replaceable. And so the fixture, if there's any component in the system that fails, the whole fixture needs to be discarded and a new one put in its place. And then if you can't find that same specification because the technology's moved on and that one's no longer offered, you have to refit the whole floor. You can understand that does mean a lot of sales for industry. And it would also be less expensive for them to design them in that way, not non-repairable. However, I would say that there is a movement underway within the IEC to develop a specification around more holistic design, where you do have repairable, upgradable luminaires. And there's a lighting expert in the UK, Fred Bass, and I'd recommend you interview him about that, as he's
good friend of mine, good friend,
co-chair. Yeah, he's the co-chair of that committee, and I know he's actively working on that. And he's also working for the UN, who's also looking at this issue of circular economy and luminaires. So I think he's a better person to speak about it than me. Okay,
well, Fred, when you're watching, well, I'll have you one of the days. I think we've got a similar situation to what we're describing with Eleanor there, that we did fantastically well on energy efficiency, but it needed mercury to do it. The introduction of the LED, which was clearly going to bring benefits in energy efficiency, required a new form of form factor, and it was inevitable that the first generations would require the body of the fixture to be the heat sink. And therefore the source is, as you say, it's cemented into the housing. But we don't need to do that anymore. The technology has moved on, and yet, so many fittings that we're still seeing. And products that would be described in the art term as eco-design. But when you look at them, you go, but when it's only eco-design because it's energy efficient. It's not eco-design because you can take it apart and put it back together again. So you're only scoring 3 out of 10. I'm sorry. Energy efficiency would have brought you 10 out of 10 a decade ago. But we've moved on, I think, a long way from there. Okay. Yeah, Eleanor.
If I may just something on something that Mike said earlier on, I think it's relevant to the greenwashing that we're talking about, is that the study that Mike did on showing that you can put LED retrofits in existing fluorescent lights, in existing fluorescent luminaires, it was done through the internet and through what is shown to be available, but by these same industries who were coming back at the table and telling us, no, we cannot replace the fluorescent lights with LEDs. So this is, it's not that CLASP is going to provide the retrofits for all lamps, but actually these same companies who have been delaying the process by saying that there is no replacement, they publicize, they demonstrate that there is this, there are these replacements for a lot more drivers and luminaires than what they would say to decision makers, who of course are not experts and will not know how to go and look into the internet to find what is best for their luminaire. So I think this is very relevant, because this has been in the heart of the discussion since the costs related to what I called before the socioeconomic costs related into taking this decision and moving away from fluorescent lighting and to LED was linked to this retrofitting, availability, plug and play issue. This has been really in the heart of the discussion.
Yeah, I think we can see a parallel, I think a different scale probably, but a parallel with the fossil fuel industry, who will say, no, the oil is the future, oil has to be the future. And at the same time, they're looking for a green solution. The green solution is what they promote. The oil is what they sell. And here we are, we've got lighting companies who will be developing and producing much more eco-friendly equipment, but at the same time, they're keeping their turnover up by selling the old kit.
John, how do you feel about a line on Minamata and the African lighting amendments?
So mercury has been known to be a global pollutant and has been accepted at global level for that. A global pollutant means that it can be emitted in one side and you can find it in the other side of the world. And that's why a decision was taken after long negotiations in 2009 to come up with a legally binding instrument at global level, which ended up being the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So the Minamata Convention on Mercury was adopted in 2013, and it entered into force in 2017. And it includes measures on supply, trade of mercury, but also on towards phasing out mercury-added products and processes. And in the products, there is an annex. It's the Annex A, which refers to Article 4, which is related to mercury-added products. And in there are already there is a decision to phase out the import, export, and manufacturing of fluorescent lights, which contain up to a certain amount of mercury. So, for the purposes of the upcoming discussion at the Conference of the Parties of the Minamata Convention, the COP4, which is awaited in 2022, there will be a discussion where the convention can actually strengthen the phasing out of mercury-added products. And the idea is that we try to have a global phase out of manufacturing, import, and export of these widely used fluorescent lamps. So towards this discussion, the African region has submitted an amendment to the Secretariat of the Minamata Convention, and this amendment goes towards that direction. And of course, it needs to be discussed at the COP, and the parties to the convention, the countries, they need to decide whether this will become a reality and when.
I do think it could be very interesting, John, to have a Minamata session where we talk about the global situation, and maybe, you know, Elena talked about it perfectly, but for someone to follow that, to concentrate for the minute and 30 seconds it's going to take to hear and internalize it all, it might be easier to have a back and forth, because one of the ways I describe it to my friends when I talk about it is to say, well, you've heard of the climate convention, right? And there's this big meeting taking place in Glasgow. Well, this is a smaller version of that. It's an international treaty about mercury, just about mercury, getting rid of mercury from everything. And it's only at COP4. So it was started in 2013. It came into force in 2017. We're just starting out. And so it's a much younger convention. And we have an opportunity here to eliminate a product, fluorescent lighting, and replacing it with something that's more efficient, that's going to, you know, lower people's energy bills, give them better quality light. And then in addition, completely eliminate mercury from that thing.
Okay. I think this has been very useful. Thank you very much for your time today. It's a conversation that is just going to roll and roll and roll, but hopefully, Eleanor, we will start to see some real movement. You know, as you say, we've had so many delays, maybe, you know, fingers crossed that we're actually going to be moving somewhere. I will certainly be talking to Fred Bass, and looking forward to getting him onto this platform. So thank you very much all for your time. I hope you've appreciated this, and if you want to get in touch with me, you know how to find me. Thank you very much. Thank you.